The first warning didn't come from a mechanic. It didn't come from a racing driver pushing a car too hard on a hot summer day in Daytona, or a dealership technician buried in warranty paperwork. It came from a banker, a quiet man in a gray suit, sitting across from an even quieter man whose entire future depended on what came next. Because somewhere in America, inside a factory that was supposed to represent the future of safe performance, an engine had started costing more money than the company could survive. Every mile driven was another dollar burned. Every test run was another gamble. And nobody wanted to admit it yet, but something inside that car was bleeding the company dry. By the time customers started noticing smoke, hesitation, and sudden overheating on highways across the Midwest, it was already too late. The fallout had begun. In the early 1970s, America was changing. Muscle cars were losing their roar. Insurance companies were hiking premiums. Washington was tightening emissions laws. And suddenly, the horsepower war that once defined Detroit started looking dangerous. Too fast, too reckless, too expensive. But one man believed the future of performance didn't have to die. His name was Malcolm Bricklin. He wasn't a racer. He wasn't an engineer. He was a dreamer with a pitch. A car that could survive a crash at 30 miles per hour without serious injury. A car that looked like something out of Le Mans, but drove like something your family could trust. A sports car that didn't kill you. And to make it real, he founded a company that almost nobody thought could survive in Detroit's shadow. The car was called the SV-1, Safety Vehicle 1. It had gullwing doors, energy-absorbing bumpers, a reinforced roll cage. This wasn't just a sports car. This was supposed to be the next evolution of American driving culture, something that could take the excitement of NASCAR-era styling and survive the federal regulations that were strangling Detroit. But there was a problem. Bricklin didn't build engines, so he had to turn to someone who did. Someone who was already struggling to stay alive in an industry dominated by giants like Ford and GM. Someone who needed the money just as badly as Bricklin did. American Motors Corporation. AMC wasn't exactly winning the muscle car war. They didn't have the marketing power of Chevrolet. They didn't have the racing pedigree of Dodge. But they had something Bricklin desperately needed. An available V8. Reliable. Affordable. Ready for production. At least, that's what everyone thought. Because on paper, a partnership made sense. Bricklin would design the future. AMC would power it. New Brunswick's provincial government even poured millions of dollars into the project, hoping to create jobs and build a new automotive identity north of the border through the government of New Brunswick. Factories were built. Workers were hired. Press conferences promised a revolution. And somewhere in the middle of all that optimism, the engine quietly became the most expensive mistake the company would ever make. At first, it wasn't obvious. Early test cars drove fine. Magazine previews were positive. Dealerships started placing orders. But then came the delays. Cooling systems failed under stress testing. Engine bays ran hotter than expected. And the SV-1's tightly packed, safety-focused design, the very thing meant to protect drivers, started trapping heat like a furnace. Engines overheated in traffic, on highways, during simple city commutes. And because the gullwing doors relied on hydraulic systems that were already struggling with reliability, overheating only made everything worse. Cars stalled in intersections. Drivers reported smoke rising from under the hood after less than 50 miles. Some vehicles couldn't make it through basic dealership delivery checks without requiring immediate repair. And every time one failed, Bricklin Motors had to pay. Warranty claims started stacking up. Thousands of dollars per car, then tens of thousands per batch. Production lines slowed down as engineers tried desperately to redesign cooling pathways that had already been approved months earlier. Suppliers demanded payment. Dealers demanded answers. Customers demanded refunds. And the worst part? The engines weren't failing in spectacular crashes or racetrack abuse. They were failing in grocery store parking lots, in school pickup lanes, in everyday American life. The kind of failure that doesn't make headlines, but quietly destroys reputations. Behind closed doors, AMC was dealing with its own problems. They had agreed to supply engines, not solve Bricklin's entire engineering nightmare. And every delay on the SV-1 meant more pressure on AMC's already limited production capacity. Deadlines slipped. Costs rose. Finger-pointing began. Was it the engine? Or the way Bricklin's safety-first chassis trapped airflow? Was it AMC's responsibility to adapt their V8 for this experimental sports car? Or Bricklin's responsibility to design around it? Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but the partnership was starting to look less like a collaboration and more like a financial trap. By 1975, dealerships across the US were reporting returns. Customers complained of engine heat soak after short drives, fuel delivery issues, unexpected stalling during highway cruising. And because the SV-1 had been marketed as the safe sports car, these failures didn't just feel inconvenient. They felt dangerous. Lawsuits began appearing, not for crashes, but for fear. Fear that the car couldn't be trusted on long drives. Fear that something under the hood might fail without warning. Fear that the company promising safety had delivered uncertainty instead. Production slowed to a crawl. Cash flow evaporated. And the provincial loans that once looked like a lifeline now looked like an anchor. Because every unsold SV-1 sitting on a dealership lot represented thousands of dollars tied up in a vehicle that might come back with an overheating complaint. Every returned car had to be inspected, modified, sometimes rebuilt, all while Bricklin Motors continued paying AMC for engines that were now sitting inside vehicles nobody wanted to drive. Then came the turning point. A routine financial review. No crash. No recall announcement on national television. Just numbers. Numbers showing that fixing the overheating problem would cost more than the company had left in operating funds. Numbers showing that continuing production would only accelerate losses. Numbers showing that the engine partnership meant Bricklin couldn't simply walk away without penalties. They had built their future around a power plant they no longer trusted, inside a car they couldn't afford to fix. In September 1975, the money ran out. Production stopped. Factories went silent. Dealers were left holding inventory. Customers were left holding uncertainty. And the dream of a safe American sports car collapsed, not in a fiery crash, but in unpaid invoices. Bricklin Motors declared bankruptcy soon after. Less than 3,000 cars had been built. Millions of dollars in government investment disappeared. Hundreds of workers lost their jobs. And AMC? They walked away with unpaid contracts, and another reminder of how dangerous it was for small automakers to gamble on partnerships in a post-muscle car America. Today, the SV-1 is remembered as a curiosity, a collectible, a symbol of ambition. But behind its gullwing doors lies a quieter story, not of reckless driving, but of engineering compromises, not of racing failure, but of financial collapse. Because somewhere between safety innovation and production reality, an engine turned from a solution into a liability. And the question that still lingers today is simple. Was it ever meant to work in the first place? Or was the partnership doomed the moment a small company bet its entire future on someone else's machine?